So welcome everybody. You are at the Summer Works Career Sneak Peek Week Series webinar. Today we have Erin Khang from University of Michigan Medicine, actually, social work manager here in Ann Arbor. She will be sharing with us her journey as she went through the process of becoming where she is now. So I want to let you know that my name is Lori Emerson. I work with Amy Cell Talent, and we are facilitating today's session. Now, with that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Erin Khang received an MSFA social work degree from the Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. After approximately a decade working as a clinical social worker in pediatric nephropathy, sorry, Erin.
No, you're good.
She took on the role of project manager, eventually social work administrative manager. In 2016, she became the director of graduate social work education at Michigan Medicine and became an adjunct professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work in 2017. She completed an interprofessional leadership fellowship in 2018. Erin currently leads over 70 clinical social workers across 4 teams and is in the social work department diversity chair. And with that, Erin, I will let you take over.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. Again, I want to present some information to you all today, and then have some time for some Q&A at the end. So I won't take up the whole hour with just talking to you, but I did want to share a little bit of my journey as a first-generation medical social worker and kind of my path, and just share some of those insights and thoughts for consideration. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I went to middle school and high school there. So that's a picture of the skyline there. And my formative years were, again, in a suburb of Cleveland, right on Lake Erie. I put a track and field there because that is my favorite sport. I ran track and field in a Division II school, so not a huge school. But I feel like since the Olympics just wrapped up, I wanted to share something personal with a tie to the Olympics. But yeah, just, my upbringing was, I am a adoptee. And so what that means, transracial adoptee, which that means is that my parents are not Asian American. And so growing up in Cleveland, there was a lot of difficulty, I think, navigating that space a little bit. And I really had to learn to grow into who I was in that space, particularly because where I lived was not very racially diverse. I lived with a single mom. Socioeconomically, we were on the lower end of things. And so we moved a lot as a result of that. So I think being a first generation student simply just means that your parents or your caregivers did not graduate high school. And that was the case for me. And so going through high school, unlike some of my other peers, I couldn't ask questions of my parents about next steps or what to do or guidance because my parents had never been through that process. My high school counselor was not particularly the most helpful as far as mentorship. And so I actually only applied to one school, and I know maybe that's unheard of these days, but I only applied to Case because the application was free. And as I mentioned before, we didn't have a lot of money. And my thought was, well, if I don't get in a Case, then I'll just go to Cleveland State, and generally that's open enrollment. So all I knew was that I wanted to stay in Cleveland. I was able to get into Case Western Reserve University, and so that is one of the universities in Cleveland near downtown. And my journey there was that I was very interested in science. So in high school, I did really well in my science classes, and I thought for sure that I was going to pursue a PhD in biology. I was really excited about pursuing science. And so I actually got a summer research grant at Case to work in the lab, and I was kind of on my way. And then actually through a series of events, I will say chemistry was a lot more difficult than I anticipated it to be, and also kind of life circumstances. I didn't end up pursuing science. And so what I decided was to seek out some mentorship actually through my work study placement, which was in a hospital of a nurse who had become a mentor to me. And she was just asking me, what are the things I like to do? What are the electives that I'm really drawn to? And at the time, what I thought was really fascinating was my psychology and sociology courses. And as we talked more and more about melting some of my science background or some of the medical things that I thought were fascinating with what I thought was fascinating around psychology and sociology, she really helped to guide me towards the School of Social Work and to find out if that might be a placement or something of interest. And so I looked into it, and that's really how I landed in social work. And so Case Western has a School of Social Work. I applied to that. I believe at the time the application was free as well for internal students. And I was fortunate enough to be accepted. So I just stayed there at Case and got my social work degree, my master's degree there. I got married shortly after my first job at Cleveland Clinic and moved to Ann Arbor, and I have been at Michigan Medicine ever since. So I'll share a little bit more about medical social work later on. But I wanted to share a couple things, just advice for maybe those of you who might be first generation students, just some thoughts or again, considerations. I would really encourage you to try to seek out community, either now in high school or when you first get into college as a freshman. Find community, find folks who can help you guide and navigate the college experience, because I think it'll A, make it more enjoyable, but B, help find opportunities, or you'll be in a community where they're discussing opportunities and you can be a part of those conversations. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There's several questions that I think were really important, and actually I wish somebody had told me to ask these questions back then. So there's three. Do you understand your financial aid package and options? So I will say, as someone who's still paying off my student loans, I think there probably were better ways to handle my student loan situation. And so if I had known some of that ahead of time, I may have not taken out as many loans or taken out different types of loans. So if you have an opportunity in general for anyone, whether you're first gen or not, just to ask about your financial aid package. But especially for first gen students, I think we just don't know the pathway and we don't always know what options are out there. Do you qualify for work study? And can you find a flexible, higher paying position that might also afford you opportunities or connections? So again, I will say that what led me to social work was really a mentor that I had in my work study position. I purely picked that work study at family medicine because it paid a little bit more. But what I got out of it was experience in a health system, a mentor as far as the nurse that was there. And she was just really influential and supportive of my career path, which I thought was invaluable. And then the last one is, as far as questions, is what is your college grad school roadmap and what do you need to get through it? One of the things that I didn't realize, because I was a first gen student and or I didn't seek out, I was a little on the shyer end then and didn't want to ask too many questions, is that I could have actually applied for grad school at Case my 4th year of undergrad. So what that meant for me is I could have saved a whole year of grad school tuition if I had known about this 4+1 program, but I didn't. And so that just means that I paid full price for both undergrad and grad school. So anytime I have a first gen student in particular, I try to encourage them to seek out what options there are in their schools, and in particular to try to see, are there options to save money based on credits or the pathway that you have. And then finally, seek mentorship. So I keep saying this over and over, but mentors have been very influential and important in my life. And I would encourage you to find a mentor who can help support you and guide you, but also open doors for you, give you advice, also tell you advice when maybe you don't want to hear it, but knows you well enough to kind of push back a little bit. But those mentors in my life have been really incredibly helpful along the way. So what is social work? I know the majority of you noted that you know what social work is generally. So I just want to share a little bit from my perspective of what I think social work is. Based on, I put the hyperlink here, so I know the slides might be shared at some point, but this is from our Council on Social Work Education. It's a profession devoted to helping people function the best they can in their environment. Additional notes around this is, we share a commitment to promote a few things, promote social welfare, to help people of all backgrounds overcome their unique challenges, to advocate for social and economic justice for all members of the community, and to embody a professional code of ethics. Our code of ethics in particular is one of the longer ones, I believe, for many of the professions. Here's an excerpt, but really what I wanna, you all can read this on the screen, but what I wanna maybe reiterate is how tied to social justice social work is. We have multiple principles. You can always Google NASW Code of Ethics. It's quite long, but we adhere to this. This is our professional code of ethics. And what I think in the end is important to note is that I believe social work is here to humanize the people or group we are working with. And so how do we humanize folks? We listen to them, we hear their stories, we advocate for them, we elevate their voices, And we take into consideration all of their identities and intersectionalities, who they are, and honor and respect that. And then from there, whatever your role is, work to partner with those patients or clients and to help them navigate whatever system you are currently working in. Some of the national priorities of the social work profession currently include voting rights, criminal justice and juvenile justice, environmental justice, immigration, and economic justice. And I'll just say as an aside, I haven't read it yet, but there was a new environmental justice or climate, I think, report that just came out. So I'm looking forward to reading some of the cliff notes on that and how that may impact my profession in general. Social work has different types or kind of levels, if you want to think about that. So there's micro, meso, and macro. And how I try to just explain this is micro is with individuals. So I might be a school counselor, I might be a substance use and recovery counselor, I could be a medical social worker, which I'll talk a little bit more about. The meso level is the in-between. So you might be working with groups or organizations, schools, businesses, neighborhoods, or maybe some nonprofits. And then the macro, as noted in the title, is larger scale change. So this is work to make systemic change, like through laws, policies, lobbying, organizing activist groups, things on that level. What are the skills that you need to learn or that you will need or learn? So there's really 4 here. I tried to narrow it down. This is also based on some information from the Council on Social Work Education, but just to go through briefly. Communication skills for sure. So I think that's at the top for a reason. Social workers need to learn to actively listen and speak to our clients in a culturally humble way. Emotional skills, we learn to build our emotional intelligence, situational awareness, and empathy skills. So you think about when you go into a space, do you happen to notice the vibe, or do you notice that someone in your group is just a little bit off, or they're by themselves, or their mood's different? Some people can notice that, and some people do not have that kind of level of perceptiveness. And I think social work really tries to teach you to hone that skill. Interpersonal skills is when we learn to work with diverse individuals and groups. We need to be able to connect with others to build effective and productive relationships. Organizational skills, social workers often have multiple clients, competing demands, and work within complex organizational and societal factors. It requires both organizational and prioritization skills to ensure that we are advocating the most effectively for our clients and patients. And then finally, problem-solving skills. Our hope as social workers is to empower others to determine for themselves what they need at the time. It's not my job to tell people what they need. It's really my job to partner with people to empower them to self-advocate or have a sense of what we call self-efficacy. Social workers often take the person and their environment into consideration to try to find innovative and realistic options for those clients or patients to consider. So how do you become a social worker? So there's multiple ways. A little bit of statistics. In 2009, there were over 700,000 social workers, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And overall employment is projected to grow 16% by 2026, which is much faster than the average for all other occupations. In 2017, there were more than 500 bachelor's degree programs and more than 200 master's degree programs that are accredited. And so listed here are a couple options. For BSW, if you want a bachelor's of social work, it's typically 4 years. That's your undergrad, but not all schools offer BSWs. And you do not, a BSW is not required for an MSW. You could major in anything that you want. And so then the next level is the master's. It's typically 1 to 2 years. Again, you can major in anything that you want. I happen to major in psychology and sociology, but you could do anything that you wanted. And then you would get a master's degree in social work. That would be probably the most common degree level that folks have when you meet a social worker. I think at least the master's degree would open up more opportunities, and especially financial opportunities for you, as opposed to stopping at the BSW level. And then the next level is a doctorate of social work. So not many people get that. If you want to do either research or leadership, that's typically the folks who pursue a DSW. Some thoughts I just wanted to include here around, well, what are some community or extracurricular activities that maybe folks in your age groups might be interested in that could help you determine whether social work or this pathway is something that you want to pursue? So anything social justice related, I would say, looks great on applications. So anything related to environmental justice, social justice, all of that would be helpful. Community support, just noting that these are not endorsements, but just ideas. Volunteering at your local food bank, volunteering at your local hospital, Ronald McDonald houses, which are homes, temporary housing solutions for those who have sick kids in the hospital. Volunteering for Habitat for Humanity, if you're not familiar with that, building homes for those in need in your local community. And then maybe even within your school. So I know some high schools in particular and some colleges have peer support or peer facilitation programs. You can actually take some trainings around how to engage your peers in difficult conversations or conversations around race or ethnicity or any kind of difficult topics. So if there's an interest and an opportunity to train in that, that would be great. And then again, anything related to social justice or environmental justice clubs could also help to bolster your applications. All right, talking specifically about medical social work. So we do a bunch of different things. I am going to hone in on something specific, but I did wanted to share the various medical settings. I think most people maybe think of a whole hospital, but medical settings for social work can also occur in nursing homes or long-term care facilities, rehab centers. We look at through the lifespan. So you could be 1 year old, you could be 101. So from pediatrics to adult to geriatrics. Geriatrics is typically around the age of 65. It's not the universal age, but that's generally the cutoff. So 65 and up. There are opportunities for social workers to be in the public health space, especially around COVID currently and what's happening. There are a lot of social workers who have either their social work degree or dual degree, a social work and an MPH, Master's of Public Health degree. There are social workers in program development and leadership and administration. For the purposes of today, I'm going to focus in on the health centers and hospitals. In the health center and hospitals, we have multiple responsibilities. Here's some that are listed here, and I'm going to give you some examples just to give you an idea of what we do here in the hospital. But we do counseling and psychotherapy. So that's, I think on TV, it's often depicted as someone sitting on a couch with a box of Kleenex sometimes, and someone sitting across from them talking for a while. And that certainly is the case in some clinic areas. We have psychotherapy built in, but we also do a whole range of things to support their medical care. And so that's kind of the rest of the list right there, which is assessing barriers to care. So why couldn't you get your medications? Is it because you weren't able to afford them, or did you lose your insurance, or did you lose your job, which then unfortunately had you lost insurance as a result of that. Resource finding, discharge planning. So once you get admitted to the hospital, how can we help you get home safely? Care coordination or care management. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Crisis intervention. So any crisis can be defined in very different ways. Patients and families define crisis differently. And so any patient and family who perceives to be in crisis, social work is often called to help de-escalate or calm the situation down and help provide support in that situation. Safety planning is really around like abuse neglect cases. Social work is considered a mandated reporter, which means that we are obligated to report any suspected abuse or neglect situations. And then end of life care. So if your family member is nearing the end of their life in the hospital, social work is often there to help support both the patient and the family through that process in a compassionate and caring way. So let me just highlight a few areas where we are. So inpatient refers to when a patient is admitted to that actual hospital. So while we often help while the patient's in the hospital. So let's say, for example, you get a family member who's admitted for a heart problem, and they may suddenly be very anxious about that. The doctor or the nurse may call social work and say, hey, the patient in bed 2 seems to be really anxious every day. Is there any way you could come by and see them, talk to them, give them resources, or help provide support to them while they're here? And so social work would go and speak to them, help give them some tools or interventions to help decrease their anxiety while they're here in the hospital, and then help them make a plan for once they get out of the hospital. We also help prepare for what might be next medically. So let's say that your family member's admitted to the hospital and they're given a new diagnosis. Social workers are part of the medical team, and so we often can give guidance about what's going to happen next. So we may not be able to explain everything medically, but we can explain how many visits you're going to have to need and what the impact is on your family and what the impact is on maybe the job or siblings. And so we can help prepare them with regard to those aspects. And finally, the helping, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but helping prepare for life after their hospital stay. So your family member may be facing needs at home that they weren't expecting after this hospitalization. Let's say they came in for a car accident and now they have a permanent need for some assistance. They can't sleep in the same bed, or they need help going to the bathroom, or whatever it is. We're not prepared for that. And so social work may help both with equipment, but also may help them adjust kind of the expectations of what we consider now their new normal of what's happening. And finally, end of life, which is not on here. I had mentioned briefly, there was a case that I had many, many years ago of a patient who was nearing the end of life. And when we called family members, they did not want to come up. They did not want to accompany or support the patient. And so for us as a social work team and the medical team, we decided to support the patient up until, the end of his life. And we felt like that was the most compassionate, patient-centered thing to do, is to make sure that someone was at bedside all the time. And so sometimes it's really a group effort for social work to pull in team members and to work with team members to do what's best to support the patient at the time. Outpatient clinics are like when you go to the doctor's office and you just go to the clinic. You're not admitted to the hospital by any means. You have an appointment, you show up, and then you leave. That's what we're talking about as far as clinics. Social workers in the clinics can support with the medical care. So let's say that your doctor just prescribed a new medication and you keep forgetting. You keep forgetting to take it. You're not sure why, but it's impacting your medical care. So the doctor may pull in social work and say, hey, Erin, the patient is having a really hard time. She keeps forgetting the medications. Can you have a conversation? And let's say the social work goes in and talks with the patient, and we find out that the reason why I'm forgetting all my medications is because I'm so stressed out because I lost my job and my kid's not doing well in school, and I'm just really stressed out. And so social work may talk about ways to remind myself. So maybe it's setting alarms, maybe it's decreasing the overall stress in my environment, maybe it's seeking counseling for myself. Maybe it is talking over with family members on having some social support for my kids so that I can take care of my medical care. So it kind of depends on that conversation, but that would be something that social work would do. We provide mental health support around depression, anxiety, any other mental health diagnoses, or even untreated mental health diagnoses. Social work can help with that. We also address any social determinants of health. And so what that means is any social factors in one's life that could then impact health. So you think about, how far are you from a grocery store? Do you have transportation to get to the grocery store? Do you have transportation to get to the pharmacy to get your medications? Do you just have a lack of resources? So at the end of the month, you're running low on food, and therefore that's impacting your diabetes. And so your numbers are worse because you don't have the right foods to eat, because you're either running out or having not the right foods to eat at the time. So any of those things will impact someone's medical care. So social work often has conversations with folks to talk about what are those things and what might be some opportunities, resources, or ways that we could potentially help navigate some of those barriers. And then the final thing is to help navigate the medical system. Medical systems are really complex. Oftentimes, if a patient has multiple diagnoses, that means multiple doctors are involved. And that also means that sometimes the care is not always as coordinated as we would like it to be. So sometimes social work can help talk with all those doctors and try to get everybody on the same page. Emergency rooms. Social workers are in the emergency rooms 24/7 typically, at least they are at our hospital, in both the children's hospital and the adult hospital. In the emergency room, we support the patient for sure. So sometimes patients come in for emergencies that are unexpected. We can help them cope or contact their family friends if they came in alone. Sometimes we support the family or the support system that came with them. So oftentimes that means I'm running between the doctors that are working on the patient and going to give updates to the patients or families that are waiting in the waiting room. Or I just provide a listening ear to them. If they're really concerned or worried, I can just help support them by sitting with them and listening to them. Sometimes patients come in and we're not sure who they are. So sometimes social work's involved with helping to identify patients. We do this through a variety of means, but sometimes we're just called to do a little bit of investigative work to try to find out who is this patient and who can we contact on their behalf since they're here in the emergency room. And then often, again, across the board, we provide resources and education depending on the need. So it might be in the emergency room that I'm giving you a handout on local counselors if I think you could benefit from counseling or if you're interested in that. I could give you applications for financial assistance. I could give you a list of substance use treatment facilities. I could give you the number to United Way 211, which has food bank information and clothing resources, etc. So emergency room is more acute, meaning it's more short term. I may not see the patients ever again. And so it's really providing whatever I can do, whatever information I can at the time when I meet them. I wanted to note some notable first gen and social workers that maybe some of these pictures look familiar. So I'll just go through them briefly, but some notable first gen students: Michelle Obama, of course, the First Lady. The second picture is Chief Justice Sonia Sotomayor. The picture below is Albert Einstein. So those were all first gen students that I looked up and confirmed that they were indeed first gen students. And then the two women listed in the current social workers in politics. The picture on the left is Michigan State Senator Stephanie Chang. She represents the 1st District. She's actually the first Asian American woman to serve in the Michigan legislature. She received her MSW from the University of Michigan. And the second picture is Congresswoman Barbara Lee. She's the U.S. representative for California's 13th Congressional District, now in her 12th term. She has served since 1998, and she received her MSW from UC Berkeley. So I wanted to close with a couple things. I appreciated this quote from Malala Yousafzai, who I think many may know her, but in case you don't, she's one of the youngest Nobel Prize laureates who received that prize. And, I really appreciate, I think this quote: while many people may desire change in their own lives and in the communities where they live, only those who are brave enough to speak out and take action will truly see change. And I think that speaks directly to what I think social work's goals and purpose is. I think this profession really needs diverse social workers who are committed to social justice and advocating for clients in all circumstances. If you want to do well in this profession, I would encourage a few things: humility, empathy, having a lifelong learning mindset. So knowing that you're never going to reach the ultimate end of like, okay, I know everything about social work. I learn things every day, every week. And I'm excited to learn new things about people and about systems and about how I can better help the people I serve. Having good boundaries, and then definitely learning self-care, learning how to take care of yourself, learning how to make sure that you are addressing your own needs so that you can help other people. With that, I wanted to thank everybody, and we definitely can go into time of questions. But I also, whenever I talk to any audiences, but in particular young folks, I like to normalize, the need for help and put up national hotline numbers just in case this would ever be of help. So the National Domestic Violence Hotline and the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline are listed there. Just to note that those numbers are there, and they are 24/7. There are multiple languages available, and the first number in particular has a texting option as well. So if you do need help, please don't hesitate to reach out to those numbers. And with that, let me stop my sharing.
Great. That was great, Erin. Thank you so much for sharing your life story with us. For anybody that has any questions, use the Q&A box and type them in, and both Erin and I will be monitoring those. The question can be about how she got into the schools. It could be about first gens. It could be about what kind of day-to-day life looks like for her. So feel free to start asking questions. While you guys are typing some of your questions, I wanted to let you know I am sharing with you in the chat box Erin's information that you should have. How to get in touch with her, how to connect with her on LinkedIn and on her Twitter handle. Trying to monitor a couple windows here. So anybody, let's see. Chat right now, question Okay. I guess what I'd like then from some of the participants, if you give me a +1 is if you learned some really interesting ways to get into the profession that Erin is actually working in. Erin, I guess at this point in time, maybe you could address, you're a very easygoing person as far as your presentation on the webinar, but what kind of personality do you think best fits in this industry?
Yeah, and then I see there's a question in the chat too, so maybe we can answer that after this. Personality, I think you really need to be interested in people, and that means all shapes, sizes, personalities, etc. We need more diverse social workers because we need more people to be able to speak to communities that are underserved and marginalized. And so, if you have an interest in lifting up those who are marginalized, oppressed, social work's for you. And I will say, just as a plug, you don't have to necessarily just be a social worker, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. Many people get dual degrees. So I know many physicians that will get their MD, MSW, and that really helps some of their family meetings and communication. I know a lot of people are MSW, MPHs. So again, the MSW degree is very diverse in that I can jump around and do lots of different jobs with my degree, which I also think is a benefit. Lori, should we do the chat one?
Yeah, actually, I'm just trying to, my window's going a little bit crazy, so I was just trying to pull that up. I'm not sure if you could see it, but the question is, what are positives and negatives you have faced while pursuing to become and working as a social worker?
Yeah, that's such a great question. The positives for sure are seeing the power of human connection and the power that social work can bring in some spaces when you partner with patients and families in the hospital to get them through a really hard time, to walk with them through their journey of their healthcare. I've seen some really devastating diagnoses, and to help someone adjust to that and then leave the hospital and adjust and come back in clinic and just see how they're thriving and see how they're succeeding. People are so resilient. And I think it's just so amazing to see that resiliency and strength that a lot of people have. And oftentimes, actually, in the pediatric hospital, we ask them to come back and be mentors to other maybe pediatric kids who've gone through that same process. So that's pretty amazing. As far as the negatives, I think it can be very tiring. So when I said self-care earlier, I really meant it. I think for any job, I would encourage you all to consider what are the things that help you, what we call kind of de-stress or decompress. What are the things that you go to that will really help you personally? Is it reading? Is it running? Is it meditation? Is it mindfulness? Maybe it is a hobby, but you have to find something that you can take a break from this work and really kind of replenish or rejuvenate yourself. And so I would say as social work, because we disproportionately see some of the harder things that society, I was going to say dishes out, but that society that we have created in many ways, right? There's systemic racism, there is oppression, there is socioeconomic hardship and disproportionate just hardship out there. That because we disproportionately get those referrals, it's easy to think, oh, the whole world is this way. And it's not, but our goal is to try to uplift everyone from an equity perspective, right? Not that everyone gets the same equal, but from an equity perspective, does everybody have the same shot at the same opportunities? That's my goal as a social worker. But I think the negatives is that sometimes early on in my career, I would get pretty exhausted because I didn't do a good job at taking care of myself at the same time. That's a really good question.
So Erin, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on, your work-life balance that you do and some of the things that maybe you focus on yourself personally. Now, you're married and, kind of thing. And social worker can also be very demanding as far as psychologically for the individual. So how do you go about, or maybe give a couple of little hints and, tactics that you use?
Yeah, no, thanks. So I think it's a few things that's evolved as I've gotten older for sure. So once I had kids, that changed a little bit. But what I would say is first in any job, try to draw boundaries around your time. So don't let work bleed into all hours of the day. And this is regardless of any job. So if you feel like you can't shut off work, you just always feel like you're under that pressure. So I would just say try to draw kind of if your hours are 8 to 4:30, then at 4:30 do all you can to wrap up reasonably. You don't want to leave anyone, you don't want to leave anything that would impact other people negatively. But as long as you've relatively wrapped things up, turn off your email, go home, eat dinner. I like to eat, so I will say I cope through eating and I cope through sarcasm. So what I also say is humor and sarcasm has saved me a lot. I have connected with a lot of people here in the hospital, connected with patients and families. You have to learn how to discern sarcasm though and humor. It's not always appropriate in all situations, but it definitely can help bridge kind of tense situations. Especially when I worked in pediatrics, it can help connect with some kids when I can be silly or a little bit sarcastic or a little bit jokey. But as far as, again, my self-care, I would say spending time with my family, prioritizing what's important to you, and then honestly seeking those out. So if running or exercise is important to you, make time for that. Put it in your calendar and then commit to it. Because I think that's the only way, because otherwise we just start, when we don't prioritize those things, it just falls to the wayside. Oh, that's not important. Oh, the stuff that's important to me is not as important. And then it just kind of becomes a habit. So I would just say prioritize things for yourself and then schedule around that. So
that's really great advice for any career, actually. Another question coming from the participants is, how did you decide to go into social work? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah. So like I said, I geeked out on the medical stuff or the sciencey stuff. But what I found out is that I was really good at biology. I was okay with physics, but chemistry, my brain just did not work that way. And so there was a combination of a couple of things. I think chemistry, I could have certainly gotten tutors. I could have pushed through. I think it would have been okay. But it was also, what do I enjoy? Like, what can I do? And so it was, thanks, Zoe. And so it was, what am I good at? What electives in college did I really like? And that was that nurse in the family medicine, my mentor, who kind of said, well, what do you want to do then? If you don't want to do basic research, I'll also share a little bit, who I cannot remember her name, and I know this is going to be recorded, but if I could remember her name, I would seek her out. There was a postdoc fellow in my research lab, and I think she was going through a hard time at the time with her defense of her PhD. And you, in the labs, you have to secure your own funding and find that it's really complicated. And she was also an Asian American female. And I looked up to her because I was like, oh, there's not many people who look like me in spaces. And I will say that's still the case. So I am often the only person of color in leadership in many of the spaces that I go into, which is why we need more diverse social workers. But she came to me and just said, look at what I'm going through. Do you want to be stressed out like this? Are you sure you want to go through this? And sat me down and just did like a little career counseling. Maybe it was a little bit of, it was her anxiety and stress coming out. But I also personally just think that nothing happens for, everything happens for a reason, and not everything's random. And I really took to heart that conversation. I also financially need to just help support my mom for a variety of reasons. We didn't grow up with a lot of money, and she was sick at the time. She had a chronic lung issue, which is why I wanted to stay in Cleveland for school. And so for me, it was practicality too. Do I want to invest 7 years in a PhD and then not have a job in the end, potentially? Or do I want to do a career that is practical? It was only 2 years and I could start making money right away. And so for me, it was a personal decision of what am I good at? What do I like? What do I commit to? What can I commit to? What financially I could do? And then time frame wise. And the only other thing I'll say is that social work, the more I looked into it, the more social work aligned with my personal values. And so, I will say from a religious, spiritual perspective, and then just from a personal value perspective, everything about social work aligns with all of that. And so I felt like as long as I could live out my purpose in both personal and professional life, that would also be something that I felt like I could do for a really long time.
That's great. Question. Now we have a question about what does a day, week, month schedule look like for a social worker like you?
That's also a good question. So for me, I'm in leadership right now. So my day, week, month looks like a lot of emails and a lot of meetings. It's a lot of Zooms. It's presentations like this. It's teaching and lecturing. It is answering a ton of emails and having meetings with folks. And so, but what I'll say is that's probably less exciting to you all. So, and you wouldn't start necessarily in leadership. So what I'd say is a typical day, week, month for a clinical social worker in a hospital is you would come in and you would look at the census or look at your patient list, who got admitted overnight or who's in your clinic that day. And you would kind of prioritize who you think might need you the most. So maybe it's a patient you know from before and you're like, oh, hey, Erin's back in the clinic today. And the last time I helped her with this, I wonder how she's doing. And so maybe it could be making sure that you check in with me because I'm on the schedule today. Or maybe it's just being ready for what's going to come at you. So I will say social work is also somewhat unpredictable. So I can show up and have a whole plan for my schedule. But if a doctor or a nurse practitioner or another social worker pages me and says, hey, this patient's really not doing well. Can you come to clinic or come up to the hospital and see them? I switch. I prioritize now that patient that really needs me, and I will run up and see them. And you just never know. And what I think is also exciting about social work is that it's not always predictable, is that you have a little bit of leeway to problem solve and try to figure out what's the best way that I can help this person or family. So I know that's a little vague. I said it's both predictable and unpredictable, but that's really social work. You just never know what's going to get thrown at you. But it's really about having that mindset that even though no matter what situation the patient and family are in, we will walk together through this, right? It's not going to be prescriptive. It's going to be, how can I help you? What do you need right now at this time? What do you need the most? It's a really good question. It's a lot of talking. So if you like to communicate, social work's the profession for you. These are really good questions.
So Erin, it's very interesting that a lot of the stuff you talked about today really pertains across a lot of different industries and fields and work. The path that you had when you chose to go through the master program and stuff like that. What advice would you give to a student now? I know you did earlier about how to go about looking for information to pursue a career like that. What have you learned?
Yeah. So other people can chime in or put it in the chat if you have any other peer support or advice. So I welcome. I'm not the end all be all for sure. I guess from my perspective, there's a couple things. Find your mentors. Don't be afraid. Don't be too shy to ask someone in your major. So there's often someone in the department of whatever that you choose in college who can help you, or in high school, if you have a guidance counselor, someone who can say, here's maybe an extra elective that you want to take in high school or college if you even just want to pursue something in the humanities. So humanities is this huge bucket of majors. And so who knows which path you want to take, but maybe you want to try out something. And so again, maybe it's a sociology 100 class, or maybe it's a poli-sci class, political science. But I would say find mentors. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Use your career services, career centers, school counselors, lean on them, and then use things like this. So my information's there for anyone on this call. If you ever have any follow-up questions about social work, as you can tell, I love to talk about social work all the time. So if you have any follow-up questions, Zoe and Lori also know how to get a hold of me, but my information, social media stuff's on there too. I actually would have a really cool story. We had someone who came in undergrad here just as a work study student, didn't have, I don't think, much interest in social work, but was exposed to the Department of Social Work. And a couple of years later, fast forward, they actually contacted me again to let me know that they actually got admitted to the School of Social Work, and then they're pursuing their social work career, which I thought was really cool. So you never know whether you kind of land in this space. And Zoe, but take advantage of your meetings with your summer works mentors. So good plug for that. So if you have any mentors, they would be good folks too. So just folks who you can run by ideas with and talk out loud. What are your options? And again, what's the pathway to that? So what I didn't appreciate is, okay, I want to be a social worker. How do I get there? My parents couldn't really tell me that. And I was a little bit on the shyer end again in undergrad, and I didn't want to ask. And it's okay if you're shy for sure, but find other ways. Maybe there's social media, right? Maybe you don't want to go talk in person, but maybe you can send an email. So do something that's within your comfort level of reaching out. And there's some public blogs. There's some things you now can look online that's a little bit easier about the profession that maybe you don't want to talk to anybody, but you could at least do your own research that way.